Okay, let's go.
Thanks, Alex. So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this Mind CDT event, which brings together future worlds and some entrepreneurs, known or not very well known to you. Before that, I would like to start today's event by just explaining a couple of things on impact and why impact is important to us. So let me just share my screen. You can see my screen. So as most of you know, or if you don't know, I'm the Deputy Impact Champion in the Minds CDT. And I have prepared a couple of slides to just guide you quickly on the impact, what it is, and how you can record it in Pure. I will not explain now how to record it in Pure, but I will forward the slides after this event to you for your information. So there are many categories of impact. These are the ones you can find in Pure. That's why I focus on that. It's basically how your research can impact cultural and societal aspects, how it can have an economic or commercial benefit, an environmental impact, an impact on the environment, on the health and welfare of the society, and also on Pure, you may find those two weird categories. Maybe it's not so common for your research, but I just put them here for completeness. I guess all four of those are easy to understand, and most of your research outputs would be somehow related to those. What are the main questions to ask me about impact? There are three main questions. One of it is who may benefit from this research? Would it be the academic society? Would it be the economy? Would it be the public? How might they benefit from this research? For example, academia could benefit from generation of knowledge. Economy could benefit from making a profit. The society could benefit if a product we develop or a concept we develop in our labs is useful to their well-being, or if we're able to monitor, for example, a disease that will improve the lives of people. Then the third main question is what will be done to ensure that potential beneficiaries have the opportunity to engage with this research? Which means, okay, you have your results in your lab. It's amazing, but how do you let other people know about that? For example, if it's something that comes out from your research and you want to make this known to the research community, what would you do? You would publish a paper, you would go to conferences. If you want to generate a profit, what would you do? You would launch a startup. Of course, impact could be generated in multiple ways. So both all these categories could be combined. You could also publish paper, you could file a patent, start a company, and at the same time, this company could have an impact on the environment, for example. So most of them could be basically combined. This is a graph I found from research councils in the UK, and they explain more about how what academic impacts and economic and societal impacts expectations of the councils are basically. You could have a detailed look at your own time. I will not go through those in detail today. And finally, what are the types of activities you could do through your work at the stage you are now to generate and record this impact you will create? As I mentioned, publications, data sets, conference presentations, all relate to academic impact. Then there are also communication and public engagement activities, which I know most of you are quite active or are going to be active in the next years, following the next years of your PhD. You could also, some of you have or may initiate a collaboration with industry and co-produce something with them. So this is another type of activity that could generate impact. And today, basically, we will focus through this event mostly on the application and the exploitation of your research results. And for this, we have invited an amazing panel to help us understand how you could do that. How could you exploit further your research outcomes? And we have today, let me introduce to you our panel members, our very own Professor Rob Monder and Alex Serb, who are directly involved with CDT, and all of you know them. Rob is the founder and CTO of Accelercom, apart from his role at the university and at the CDT, and Alex is the co-founder of Arc Instruments. We also have the pleasure to have with us today Dr. Iris Kramer. Iris was at the position same as you. She was a PhD student once, and recently, I guess, and and during her PhD studies, she came up with an idea which ended up with her founding the company Arc AI, which she will describe to us. And finally, we have with us today Ben Clark, who is the director of Future Worlds, the university's impact accelerator, startup accelerator, which helps students bring their ideas from a concept to the point where they can have a spin out or a startup. And let me start with so I will stop sharing my screen and ask Rob to start perhaps telling his story, his journey, how he came from being an academic to be at the same time holding this dual role of being also an entrepreneur. Rob, it's to you.
Okay. Thank you. I just noticed that Alex and Iris and we've all named our companies so that they appear at the beginning of the phone book. We've all got a company starting with A. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Very good. Okay. I'll perhaps keep it on this view, so I've got the thing on the side here. So yeah, well, thank you for having me here. As Dmitry mentioned, I split my time between my role at the university. I'm a prof in the wireless comms research group. I'm also theme lead for the TODS theme in the Minds CDT, and I work with Dmitry on the impact agenda as well. And yeah, split my time between doing that at the university and working for the spin-out company Accelercom as the CTO. We're based at the Science Park in Chilworth. And really, I just wanted to share with you some insights and a bit about the journey that we went on in order to start the company. Put more focus on what came before we started rather than what has happened since we've started. And the sort of myth or the fear that I always had for many years before starting the company, I always wanted to do something like this, but didn't know how. And I thought that I had to do lots of reading of management books and training and go to night school on MBA or something in order to be able to leap over a brick wall as a barrier to entry. And I think that could have been one way of doing it, not to knock that route, but in the end, I found that there was a series of smaller steps that I was able to follow. And so we often talk about the pathway to impact. And so on here, I'm saying it's paved with many stepping stones. You just need to figure out what each of the steps, what the next step should be. And you tend to find, at least I found, that each one led into the next. So the pathway to impact that we've had at Accelercom, I've quantified 14 different steps here, starting with the initial research that we were doing and taking that through projects, patents. I think that patent is a really good way of getting introduced to the sort of opportunities and process around all of this. Future Worlds, we'll hear from Ben later on. Set Squared, who we've got engaged with us as part of the Mind CDT Innovation Camp. So some support that I and the team received from Set Squared I'll talk about. And that led to an Innovation UK grant and the spin out ultimately. As I said, I won't put too much focus on what has happened since the spin out. Perhaps I can tell you that story on another occasion. So the particular research that we as a team were doing was all around communications, wireless communications, and then their acceleration into hardware. So we're looking at how we can take these complicated algorithms that typically we publish in papers and make them real, make them into a real electronic system that can do the number crunching in real time. So this involved jointly designing the algorithms with the hardware And by doing that, if you have a deep understanding of the algorithm, it means you know what corners you can cut when you build the hardware. And if you have a deep understanding of the hardware, then you know where to focus your efforts when you're designing the algorithm. So that was the research that we were doing. And around all this, we proposed a project to EPSRC for funding around developing these techniques. And we were very, and at the time, there was a lot of emphasis from EPSRC on pathways to impact. There used to be a document you had to write as part of a proposal for EPSRC around how you're going to generate impact for the research. It's gone away recently, but yeah, this was a big part at the time. And we were very bullish about this. We said that we will generate a patent from each aspect of the project. We said we're going to have dozens of patents come out of this project, which was, in retrospect, was probably a bit too ambitious and not very realistic. But we had some proof of concept results in the proposal, which we hadn't published anywhere. And the reviewer criticized us. They said, well, if you're so bullish on patents, how come you haven't patented this proof of concept that you're telling us all about? And it was a criticism, but we turned it into a compliment in our response by saying, thanks for the encouragement. We'll go ahead and do this. And so that led to us going down the route of patenting initially. And that was really useful because it opened the door to the team, to the Research and Innovation Service at the university, and the Research and Innovation Service and the patent panel. Actually, Ben and I both sit on the faculty's patent panel. It's a really good way of starting to go down the stepping stones I describe. So the panel funds the writing and submission of patents, but the panel is always eager to see that there's a real tangible plan for impact behind that proposal, that idea for a patent, and it leads typically to engagement of the various researchers bringing things to the panel with Future Worlds, with Set Squared, with various different support mechanisms, Research and Innovation Service themselves, which helps researchers who have a patent idea to develop it into real impact. So we went ahead and we wrote a patent and filed that. And I was quite naive at the time. I thought that industry would notice that a patent had been filed by a university on the south coast of England and come knocking on the door trying to get their hands on it. But of course that's not how it really works. That's not how it happens. And so a year later, when there was a renewal required and the university would need to put more money into the patent, I was asked to explain the progress that we'd made, and I had a few bits and pieces to talk about, but the panel asked me to really step it up and go to California and speak to potential licensees and try and monetize this patent. So that really helped, and it was at that time that Future Worlds was just getting started, and it was really useful. We received a lot of help from Future Worlds, in particular on how to develop the pitch. So before talking to Future Worlds, the way we were describing the research was with block diagrams and complicated equations that were impenetrable for anyone other than researchers in the area, which is only a relatively small number of people. So with the help of Future Worlds, we developed an analogy for the research, which made it much easier to explain. We had hose pipes. Actually, more recently, Accelercom has adopted a new analogy, which is motorways. But yeah, nonetheless, the genesis of all this was back then with the help of Future Worlds, and recording a pitch video as well, which really helped to bring the pitch to life. And you can see in my hands there in the video is a set of hose pipes that I'm using to try and explain the idea. Then I was also introduced to Set Squared, and there was some training that they offer the Researcher to Innovator program. And my hope is we'll organise some of this for the innovation camp we have planned, which gave me some training, introduced me to the business model canvas, helping me to understand all the different things you need to think about when pitching a business proposition. We then went on to another program, which is called iCure, myself and my colleague Tai Hai, who still works for Accelercom. And this gave us funding to travel the world and speak to all these different companies and understand the supply chain for the IP that we had developed all the way through to real use. in both the cellular market and the specialist market. And that was a really eye-opening experience. We learned a lot in that time about what the real problems are faced by industry and how our research can address that. We had to do a bit of a pivot as a result of this. And then we were asked at the end of that ICO program to pitch our spin-out idea to Innovate UK for funding. And they gave us 3 weeks to write a business plan. So Tai-Hi did all the numbers and I did all the words, but we pulled it together and submitted this, and we got funding. We got £500,000 of funding to spend. And actually this business plan, many of the words that are in there survive today in Accelercom's business plan, which has been updated over the years. So we had at least half an idea that was right back then. We've done a lot of development and broadened the scope and ambition of what we've been doing over the last 5 years, but the genesis of it all was back there. And so today, just fast forwarding through the last 4 or 5 years, now the company is based at the Science Park. There's 35 people in the team. We've got multiple products across software and hardware and ASIC and all different types of deployment. We've got 3 investors. The company's valued at more than 20 million now, and yeah, lots of different customers. These are 3 that we can talk about publicly, but there's some other big names that you would definitely know as well, which we can't talk about publicly. Okay, so that's my 10 minutes. I'm very happy to answer any questions when we get to the panel discussion later on.
Thank you very much, Rob. Very exciting your journey to today with the company. I would like to ask all the audience if they have any question which they want to keep for later, because now we will go through with the rest of the presentations. Please put your questions in the chat, and when we finish, you could either I could read your questions for you, or you could raise your hand and ask it. But feel free to put your questions in the chat now if you like. With this, I would like now to welcome Iris Kramer. She had also a quite different story to tell. I'm looking forward to listening to it. Over to you, Iris. We can see your slides, but we cannot hear you.
I can't on. Oh, I can unmute.
No, that's fine. We can.
Can you
see
my slide or not?
Yes.
Oh, brilliant. Okay. All right. So I will take you on an overview. First of all, talking about the academic journey and how I came to spinning out. And so that will be like all on the technical side of what I've been doing and what the results were, and then how I started to spin out, and how that journey has been for the last year, and what different grants I've applied to and got, and where I'm at the moment. So I was a PhD student at the Vision Learning and Control Group in ECS, and supervised by Jonathan Hare, which maybe some of you know. So the remote sensing images that I've been using for my work is aerial imagery. On the left, which you can see at the top, there are earthworks, and at the bottom there are crop marks, revealed to us by crop stress that it reveals only a few times a year. And at the right, we can see the LiDAR images that I'm using, which we can detect earthworks as well, even under forests where no other method really works. So they're very powerful for archaeology already, but there's a lot of data out there. And like with the crop marks, we cannot see them all year long. So we really have a lot of data to plow through, satellite images that are available to us, and we want to find all the archaeology there. So I started seeing whether we could use automation. So in my master's, I created a automated technique with not with deep learning or anything, just with a rule-based approach, and it worked really well then. So I applied for the PhD, which then in the end I was able to get money from the Ordnance Survey and EPSRC to start my own project here. And so what I wanted to use really was convolutional neural networks, because probably you know how well they work in computer vision now. So yeah, just a basic background. So we train our networks on previously known archaeological site locations and our remote sensing sources. And then internally, when we've trained it, the network will learn all the features required for a correct classification. So create features for lines and edges and circles that it needs to find the objects. And then the trained model can be used across the country to infer previously unknown sites and give us instant results, really. So before starting my PhD, most deep learning research was shown on images of cats and dogs, which are quite distinctive to find. And we found various challenges of working with remote sensing data, which is much different, and looking for archaeological sites. Archaeology is often difficult to spot because thousands of years of habitations is stacked on top of each other, and erosion or plowing might have really faded those features. So we have a small data problem as well, often only a maximum of 100 sites per object, and that really makes it difficult for a network to learn the pattern. Like deep learning normally is trained on, or at least when it first brought out, it was trained on millions of images. So to bring that down to 100 is pretty difficult, but with different techniques, we've made it work since starting in a long time ago. And so finally, also, have a sparse data problem. So because the sites that we are looking for are located far away from each other in the landscape, and that creates an overwhelming background class. And so because of these challenges, we found it essential to start each new case study with a simplified approach, which is just image classification. We cut an image around the object and a similar amount of background images, and then iterate different models, try out different techniques. And if that model specifically works for us and the visualizations work for us, then we go on to use that in object detection or segmentation. So our first case study was on the New Forest, where there are many barrows, burial mounds, also known as, from the Bronze Age. And we trained our model using both LiDAR images there and aerial imagery. And here at this image classification stage, we review what objects were easy to detect and which were difficult. And we found that many barrows here were either plowed out or not visible at all anymore. And for aerial imagery, we found that many of the known barrows were either under forest canopy or also plowed out. So the known archaeological record had been gathered over 100 years. So we really needed updating before I could continue. This kind of image classification really made me realize that. And before I put something weird into the model and it will come back with something weird, I had to clean up the data set a lot. And creating good training data is 90% of the work of this kind of AI. So yeah. Then when I'd cleaned up the data set, I was able to continue. Object detection provided good results for us with some mistakes that could be avoided. Bomb craters that were detected because of a use of a wrong visualization. That's only something I found out in object detection, like differences between concave and convex objects. So then we went into an Aran case study, which is an isle in Scotland. And we worked very closely there with Historic Environment Scotland, and they prepared a data set for us, which was all very recent. So I didn't have to do any cleanup necessarily, but still I wanted to check with image classification whether that was the case. And indeed, it was able to detect those images almost perfectly. And even whatever was confused, any objects were also for a junior archaeologist that would have been able to, they would have confused the same thing. So didn't have to do any further data cleaning. And it worked really well, object detection. We only found about 200 false positives, and which I then sent back to the Historic Environment Scotland. They reviewed it. They found a few objects where they were a bit like, this is very interesting. One of them being this roundhouse. The Historic Environment Scotland expert compared it with some of their work they'd previously done on the island, also including a field-based study. So they walked around. You can see the GPS location of the surveyors here, but they actually in the field said, nope, this is a natural thing. But in the end, the Historic Environment Scotland expert agreed with the AI and is now a big proponent of what technology can hold. So actually, of all the 200 false positives we found, 130 were previously unknown archaeological sites and new discoveries. So it worked really, really well. And so I was so encouraged by these good results that I started to think about follow-up research and how I could best leverage the technology for good. And so Archaea was born, and we are on this mission to de-risk construction and save vital historical sites from unnecessary destruction. And I hope that with these automated detections, we will also reduce mistakes that were made, like that roundhouse that now won't get lost in a construction if a road takes place on that location. So it can't be looked over. So now I'll quickly talk about the journey that I took basically from these kind of good results to like, wow, how am I going to use this? I basically stepped into Future Worlds and asked for some guidance. I applied for like an award with the European Space Agency, and I said, "Oh, is anyone at Future World able to look over my what I've written here?" And so their resident mentor, Virginia, she had a look over what I'd written and helped me very much with making it sound more businessy, because we're academics. We don't know what kind of succinct writing they like and what kind of numbers they want to hear. It's not just about, look, my product is amazing. It's also about, is there an industry pull for your product? So she was really able to bring that out of me, and also for me to start speaking to some of these construction companies to see what the problem is. Also getting some reading some more news articles on where it went wrong, where an archaeological site was found during a construction project, and how much that cost of the delay actually costed to the company. Now that's information that they don't want to share often, but I did find out that just a 1-day delay on a big project can cost £100,000. So there's definitely a big problem there that I was able to solve with my product. So that encouraged me. I then went on to finish the PhD, but I also applied to Royal Academy of Engineering Enterprise Fellowship, which I didn't get, but I did get into the Geovation Accelerator. So that is from the Ordnance Survey. They also were my sponsor for the PhD, so I think I had a good chance of getting in, and they offered me £20,000 and also 6 months of training. So it was really, really helpful, and gave me lots of new connections within the property and construction industry. So that was in spring 2020. Then towards the end of 2020, I got more confident, spoke with lots more companies, and had some talks about trials. And then there was the Future Worlds Dragon's Den, where I was able to secure investment. And also at the same time, I applied for a Sprint grant. Sprint got some money from the UK Space Agency, and I was able to get that. I also applied again for the Royal Academy of Engineering Enterprise Fellowship, and this time I was able to get it. So from January, I was super busy on all these different projects, and also managed to finish the PhD finally. So now we are working again. We finished the Sprint grant. And we are now working on a Nesta grant, again, another one. So I've got loads of grants, but also I want to, now we are starting to get into like real commercial deals and closing investment. And that's kind of the journey we're on now. And so I will show you a few more pictures of our latest results because they're fun to see. So this came out of the Sprint project. Here we have the LiDAR data, and we can find ridge and furrow on it. So this is an agriculture aspect of what they used in medieval times. So it works much better than when we just started. It just keeps getting better. That's the brilliant thing about the AI. We're also now using satellite imagery and OS imagery to detect crop stress. So one of those things that is so difficult to find, and the AI can just sift through all those images. So we're making like valuable strides in technology as well as getting more business awareness. Yeah, that's my talk.
Thank you very much, Iris. Very inspiring. And thank you also for mentioning the grants you didn't get, but you persisted. I think this is a very good message to give to master's and first year PhD students, because it's not just the successes we usually brag about, it's also the many times we have made attempts and failed to get to those successes at the end. Yeah. I see Alex and Ben also nodding. Okay, so let's move on to the next speaker for today, who is Alex, I think. So Alex, over to you.
Thank you very much. So from the kind of high-octane world of professional entrepreneurship, as we might call it, I'm here as a bit of a weirder animal, a much more relaxed approach. You'll see what I mean in a second. If I just can share my one and only slide that I'm going to show you. This one you should be able to see. There we go. You see my slide, okay? Oh, okay.
Yes.
Good. So today, as Dimitra kindly said, I represent ARC Instruments, where ARC stands for Array Control. The business traces its origins back to 2015 or so, when we were handling arrays of electronic devices called memristors. I mean, most of you are in the CDT, you've heard at least the term of what this is. It's basically a bunch of electronic components. We fabricate them in our clean room, and then we need to characterize them to see how they work. It's a highly experimental technology. Of course, we did that back then using the then available instrumentation, which was some huge kind of expensive machinery, very high precision, very well-engineered machinery, but also extraordinarily expensive and slow. As you know, in electronics, there's always this trade-off. Usually when you want to measure something with that kind of precision, the trade-off is you spend a lot of time doing it. So we are talking about machinery that costs north of 50K to do these kinds of experiments. And also they usually do it on very few devices, in fact, one usually at a time. So when you have a big array, of course, that's extraordinarily time consuming. So of course, like every lazy researcher, we put a lot of effort into developing an instrumentation that can accelerate that process, get all that boring measurement out of the way as fast as possible with just enough accuracy, as much as we need. And you can see basically the results up here in the top left where it says ancestors. So we started from a breadboard well before any idea of commercialization was in place, and then those started getting more and more elaborate because we were thinking, you know what, wouldn't it be nice if we had this capability and that capability and that capability. Before long, that kind of avalanched into a point where we thought, you know what, if we just slap a nice cover on it, improve a bit the software and make it user-friendly, we can actually sell this thing. So that was basically the jump from the last ancestor into our commercial product, which is ARC1, and you see it there, it looks the part. We've even got a nice photograph taken of it, something that would look nice on a website. Of course, even at the time when you make this kind of jump and you start thinking of going commercial, the question arises very quickly, is this something you want to do professionally? Are you becoming a professional entrepreneur? Is this company going to be the rest of your career? And pretty early in our case, we said, nah, it's not going to happen, because we did this for us as a group of memristors, research, characterization, applications development, what have you. And we knew that there were quite a bunch of such groups outside in the world, but we never thought that there were many enough to actually sustain the business. So I remember very distinctly when we started the company, we thought, okay, we will sell maybe 10, 20 of these instruments, make a reasonable bundle of cash, and then wrap it up, because who else is going to buy this? But it turns out that that's actually not what happened. We sold a lot better than we thought. In fact, because of this, ARC Instruments grew kind of organically, so we never even bothered with trying to attract funding like that. We designed it, we went to our PCB kind of manufacturers, and we came up with a nice procedure to assemble these things quickly, and we just started selling them with practically no capital. We just paid from our own pockets for the production costs and said, to hell with it, because it's a very small instrument. By now we have sold about 80 over these 4 years, 4 or 5 years, however it's been, at £5,000 a piece. It's not a huge amount of money, as you can imagine. It's nothing to scoff at either. However, it's certainly a lot better than we thought. So we're kind of stumbled into entrepreneurship this way. And our customers include actually companies such as Toshiba, Huawei, and IBM. I don't know what they were thinking, but they actually bought from us, and I'm very grateful for that. So eventually, with this kind of unexpected success, let's say, we started thinking, you know, maybe we should actually take this company a bit more seriously. And we've been developing a second product for the last year or so. And three important decisions that we took through this procedure was that despite any new products, etc., decision number one is we do remain primarily academics. So unless the company flies really high, it's going to be difficult for us to change career. We are academics at heart, and that's a decision that each of us has to make for themselves, and we've made ours. So ARC will just remain a side business for the foreseeable future. However, if you want to play this kind of game, you need to compensate for that. You will not be able to have staff and all of that kind of infrastructure that allows you to run a business. You'll have to do a lot of the work yourself. So what we've done is that anything that we do within ARC, we have an insistence on our processes and procedures, like assembly of a product, being extremely efficient. So once we get all the components for an ARC board, we can assemble it within 5 minutes and test it within an hour. And that is an acceptable kind of drain of time before we can ship our product. So we outsource pretty much everything and just do the final assembly. We stick in the software, we do the testing, and we provide the customer support afterwards, which again, we've also written what I think is an exceptionally good manual, because out of all these customers, very, very rarely have we heard back from them saying there is a problem. Every now and then, maybe once every 3-4 months, you get an email from someone saying, oh, here's something interesting I can do. Can you modify the code for me to do that? But that's about it. And that's an acceptable kind of level of extra effort for the company. Second decision was to go for a secondary revenue stream beyond sales, which is that we participate in project proposals as a contracted partner. So usually when you write a grant proposal, there are two ways in which industry can participate. The most common is that you get a big incumbent player, lots of money, and they say, here's 10, 20, 30, 40, 50K. We'll do this kind of in-kind contribution. We'll give you some data, whatever it is. So they make a contribution and then they get something out of it. They get training, or they get some IP, or they get whatever it is. But the other way for smaller companies is to say, we'll contract this tiny company to make an instrument to do A, B, C that we need for our research. And we basically are running the company and producing our second product based on an EU project where we did exactly that. We said we will deliver by then an instrument that can do A, B, C. And we've engineered it to make it generic enough so that we think it will sell actually quite well to other customers, which takes you to the third decision, that for our second product, the ARC2, the engineering decision was to make it fit specifically for a much larger market. So we are no longer looking at our community members. There's, a small kind of chummy community of researchers in a relatively narrow field, but rather we've turbocharged our system. We've gone from 32 pins serial, if you want some technical details, to 128 pins fully parallel. You can pretty much stick any chip, say for, some huge FPGAs or microprocessors, and then you just do everything in software, and you can test that chip. Because usually what happens for those of you that are interested or are doing IC design is that you have an idea, you put it on a chip, you design the chip, then you send it off somewhere to Taiwan, usually to get manufactured, and you have a gap of 2-3 months until the chip comes back from the foundry. And what everyone does in that time is that they build a PCB, which is bespoke to that particular chip. It's made to measure and test that chip. So by putting an instrument that has so many pins, and half of which are actually high precision and high speed analog, you can reconfigure between the two, and the other half of which are digital, you have so much flexibility that we believe, and we'll see whether that turns out to be true, that we can take that element, that cost element, out of the vast majority, I would say, of projects out there, not necessarily only in academia, but also in industry. Industry is no exception. They go through the same procedures. So I think I've probably talked enough. So on the slide, you can just see what the interface looks like here on the top right, along with the instruments, a nice Python interface. Again, we actually did make an effort to make it look nice and make everything look intuitive. Like anyone who's ever been in a lab, you can probably vouch for my statement when I say there are few things that are more annoying than having something that's counterintuitive or badly documented. So if you are making any kind of physical product, please pay attention to that. It makes a big difference to your customers. And here again, at the bottom of the slide, just to give you a more concrete idea of what I'm talking about, here's a corner of the instrument, and you see the kind of interfacing decisions that we've made. So inside here in the square with the dashed red white line, you have at the very center a holder for a particular package, which is quite common, and it supports up to 68 pins around it. Just around the package holder, you have a bunch of headers, 4 headers, which allow you to connect to a probe card. Again, they sustain 64 pins. And if you want to do an individual device, we have this bank of BNCs at the bottom. So why would I mention this? Because even back then, when we decided let's sell this, we had to actually think that if we want to capture a sufficient fraction of this kind of community which does memory store research, we do actually have to think from the beginning about how to satisfy the needs of as many clients as possible. So we knew already from the field, from our own actions in the field, that these are the main interfacing capabilities. You have to support some kind of package, you have to support some kind of probe card, and you have to support probe needles, because each of those probably represents about 1/3 of your market. And even in a small market, that makes a big difference. So you always have to think about how you segment your market. Of course, in our new ARC, we've gone for an even more flexible approach where effectively, if the customer has a special interfacing need, we have a big bunch of headers, and they can come to us and say, here's how we need to interface it. And we'll say, no problem. And within a week or 2 maximum, we can design a bespoke interfacing PCB, 128 pins plus power, latches onto the system, it locks in, and you can have it on your desk within less than a month. So again, we are thinking a lot more seriously about our market and how to get the biggest chunk of the pie of the market, of course, that we target. So anyway, I hope this gave you a good overview of ARC, and I'll give back the podium to Dimitra. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Alex. That was a very interesting perspective and a different approach to the previous 2 we heard about. I also liked the fact that you placed yourself on one side of the fence. You said we are primarily academics and want to keep it like that, which is something that's not so clear to everyone coming from an academic background and starting interactions with business. But I guess Ben is the best person to take the torch and continue from here, as he's the one who is actually bringing down that fence, or trying to, and bring together academics with business. So over to you, Ben.
Thanks, Dimitra, and thanks. It's been great to hear Rob, Iris, and Alex share such different stories, and hopefully for each of you, you found it really helpful to see that there are different approaches, there are different routes that you can follow through. Things can look very different for different people, and I think it's really important to stress that everyone's journey is unique, and so don't fall into the trap of assuming that there is only one way and it has to look like this, or to be an entrepreneur you have to look like that, or you have to have this kind of background, because it's invariably wrong, and so often people are held back by these assumptions that they have in advance, and often those assumptions are wrong. And for me, it's a tragedy to see people hold back from pursuing something that could be really exciting, could be great for them, because of a misplaced assumption up front. So hopefully this has been really helpful for dispelling some of those myths. I was entertained, Rob, hearing you liken or highlight the fact that all of you are A's, and so therefore at the beginning of the phone book. And I guess for millennials, the big question is, what on earth is a phone book? But yes, all A's, so you're at the front of something. From my side, as Director of Future Worlds, I have a real privilege of working alongside students and researchers and academics in exploring their journeys to potentially launching startups and spin-outs. I delight in it. I think it's absolutely fantastic. I'm a firm believer that universities are one of the best places to launch a startup, and there's a whole range of reasons. Firstly, you are surrounded by fantastically bright and capable individuals, be they your peers, be they the supervisors that you're working with, be they the ecosystem of people around the university. And all of that creates a really enabling environment to test things, to test ideas and explore. Within Future Worlds, our purpose really is to try to help to encourage you to take those steps to explore. And I suppose one of the things that I see time and time again is often at the beginning, you don't know where that's going to lead. You don't know quite how that's going to shape up. So it's like Iris, working with Iris, you didn't know what the end might look like. And the end, of course, for each of these people is still unrealized. So exactly where it's going to lead to for each of them, who knows at this point? There's no certainties, but unless you take those initial steps, unless you start exploring and testing some of your ideas, then you will never know. And for me, while you're studying, particularly while you're studying through your PhD, you have time to explore. And I would encourage each of you to use that time to explore, to speak to people, to ask questions and find out whether or not there's some opportunity that you could tap into. Rob mentioned some of the support that we gave him in the very early stage. That was before my time with predecessor Ruben. Iris mentioned some of the support that we've given. There is a whole range of things that we do. First and foremost, it is about coming alongside you and trying to help you if you are wanting to explore it. We've got a range of mentors like Virginia that Iris mentioned, very many of them with long backgrounds in engineering, in senior management, a number of early stage investors that give their time completely free to people coming through Future Worlds just to help them to think through what their options might be. We're plugged in with a lot of structures like the Royal Academy, doing the enterprise fellowships, linking in with Set Squared. So we can help you if you're looking to explore potential grant funding. We can help you if you're looking to go for equity funding, the range of investors that keeps on growing around Future Worlds. And so more and more of them are keen to support and help to fund if that is a route that you're looking to go down. Some of the other practical things that we do every year, we're the only UK university that goes to CES every year out in Las Vegas when it's meeting in person. So this year, 2021, it was online only, but for the 5 years previous to that, we've been out in Las Vegas, and it's great to be the only UK university there. We're closely tied in with the UK pavilion there, so it gets lots of exposure. It's a great opportunity to meet hundreds of potential clients, potential investors, potential partners in a very short space of time. And we've seen the difference that can make to people early in their journey. And so again, that's one of the opportunities that you can tap into while you're here at the university. But I think if there was one headline that I would want to encourage you on is don't be held off by misplaced assumptions that may or may not be correct at the beginning. Take the time to explore, take the time to test some of your ideas. There's always more that you can find out. But happy to answer any questions if anyone wants to know any more specific details. But I think from my side, it's great to leave the floor mostly with Alex and Rob and Iris, the people who are doing it from a position closest to where you are now.
Thank you very much, Ben. I think your experience will be very helpful here. If you could also go answer the questions I will be addressing to each one of them now, because you have been communicating and interacting with many of academics becoming entrepreneurs. So if we kick off now the panel discussion, first again, I would like to thank all our panel members here. And second, to the audience, please, if you have any questions, just don't hesitate to either write it on the chat or raise your hand, and we'll let you ask a question yourself. So first, I would like to ask one question to all of you, basically, which you may or may have not completely addressed during your talks. I wonder, what were the key challenges when you decided to start your own company? The problems you faced, the insecurity you felt, what would that be? So let's start with Rob, perhaps.
Hi. Yeah, I think at the time I struggled quite a lot with the worry about the risk I thought that I was taking, that I would be devoting a lot of time to something that may or may not lead anywhere. I wasn't taking any risk in terms of financial or I wasn't really staking too much, because I had my university position to support me, but I was very worried about the risk I was taking in terms of the time I was spending. But in retrospect, I realized that all that time I invested in developing this, even if it hadn't gone anywhere, it would have been extremely valuable because of all the learning I did. It really took me outside of my comfort zone. And yeah, if it hadn't led anywhere, that learning would still be paying its dividends today.
Certainly. Iris, was it the same for you?
Yeah, for me, the risks were really very low. I moved. Well, COVID hit when I was starting to hit my wanting to do the company, so I moved back with my grandparents actually. So just to save on rent and everything, and I was able to start the company and have very low money coming out. So for me, the risks were low. I also didn't have the PhD was near to finishing, so I didn't have any career other side than that. I think for me, the biggest challenge was constantly moving out of my comfort zone. Like I'd finally found a comfortable position where I'd gone from archaeology into machine learning, and I finally found out how to do the machine learning bit. And then I went into business, and I didn't know the business bit. So again, I had to start from scratch in a way. So that all that learning and constantly feeling not really good enough, maybe like a little bit of imposter syndrome of like, oh, I don't know about these things, but then all these accelerators and the future walls and this kind of conversations that you can have, because there's so much help out there, like people really want to help, and I thought that was just incredible of how much time people are willing to devote to you to just help you along with this kind of things, and how other founders as well, like just knock on their door, ask them, and they can give you some of their time, and they've got so many valuable lessons that they are willing to share with you as well. So that really helped me through that period where I was like trying to get up to speed with understanding business.
Yeah, it's good to know you're not alone and you have people with more knowledge than you to go to. Yeah. Alex, what about you? What do you think were the key challenges when you started ARC Instruments?
Well, given that we started very, very gently, it was a very gentle progression. The risks were sort of minimized a lot. So when you want to stay in academia and you make that kind of decision, the calculation changes slightly. So you're thinking, okay, I'm doing this company. Does this mean I'll become a less competitive researcher? Will my paper output drop? So the main metrics of concern are not the revenues and the growth of the business, but rather your bibliometrics and the kind of ability to get grants. But the calculation is in many ways similar. You have to choose between two pathways, and how to balance them, at least in the beginning. It's just that I chose one set of metrics over the other. And beyond that, we always came from a position where we said, okay, we'll use this very agile kind of approach where we only manufacture on demand. We never stock more than, in the beginning, we'd never stock more than 5 instruments at a time. So that meant, and they are not perishable, of course, so we can store them, and even worst case, they can gather dust for years. So I never too much front loaded. So for me, it was, in a sense, I feel a lot easier than for Rob or Iris.
Ben, what do you think from your perspective, having an overview of people come to you? What are usually the biggest issues they face?
So I see two things. One, I see there can be a culture of people almost thinking that business somehow is some kind of black art and really difficult. My conviction is all of you are hugely capable, technical people, often far more intelligent than people who have been very successful in business. So don't let anyone tell you that business is somehow something that you wouldn't be able to understand. It is absolutely something that you can understand and you can learn. No one is born a brilliant business person. Everyone learns it. And so have the confidence that you can learn it. You've been able to learn a huge amount already in a different field. You can transfer a lot of that into business. I think the other thing is this idea of kind of one big binary choice that you make at some point, and this sort of huge risk that you might take at some point. And it's very rarely like that. Actually, the journey looks much more like research, and it's repeated iterative testing, and you keep on amassing validatory evidence that you get along the way that helps to confirm that, yes, this is a good step to take. And as you keep on amassing that evidence, it will give you more clarity about the route that you're going to take and more confidence that you're on the right track. And so you can keep on testing that and learning that along the way without taking any big risk up front. It's very rarely this sort of close your eyes and jump off the cliff and hope that you've got a parachute on. It's much more taking steps, like Rob said, these repeated stepping stones along the way. It looks much more like that.
Yes, indeed. And this learning curve continues still, I guess, for all of you. So Rob mentioned a bit about IP and how he started thinking about it. How about Alex and Iris? Did you also file any patent with your ideas, or what's your approach to that?
I think that our journeys will be very different because I'm purely software. And so for me, I spoke with a patent lawyer very early on, also through Future Worlds, and she told me that it's almost impossible to patent software, because if you change one line of code, it's completely not anymore the same thing. So it's difficult to patent. That's also difficult because investors love patents and love protection, and so was difficult for me to convince them. So, but yeah, with software you just don't have it. I could patent, for example, a process that I would go through. So I could patent if I find a way to originally use satellite images to do something that has never been done before. Then I could try to patent that, but that's something that I might do in the future. But at the moment, I'm not pursuing it. I know that the Ordnance Survey that I worked with quite closely during my PhD, they tried patenting trained models. And for me, that sounds just ridiculous. And just they want patents because they want just more patents all the time. And that's some sort of badge of well done you. But it's already your you've got. I have a big training data set, and it's just my intellectual, not IP, but it's it's anyway protected by law if you have a data set that you keep secret. So I didn't worry about patenting anything else.
Alex, you mentioned about selling to Toshiba. Are you not afraid that they will just copy it and make it themselves? I wonder.
That's the interesting bit, that each business, and in fact it's quite interesting to see that the three of us all have completely different approaches. So one relies on patents or has a significant basis on patents, another one on data, and we rely on just good engineering. So for example, let's say Keithley, Agilent, etc. I'm going to buy a Keithley instrument because or an Agilent because it can measure 1 picoamp. That's something very hard to engineer. So if you have a very good execution, and we found that through developing both of our products, it takes an enormous amount of time and effort and requires a lot of accumulated knowledge and non-documentable know-how to actually make it work and sell it. So for us, the barrier for copying this instrument is just not worth it for anyone. So if Toshiba wants to have that kind of capability, yeah, they can spend 10 times the amount, hire someone, bring them up to speed, design it, test it, fail, test the next version, succeed. Even the time wasted without that capability is worth much more than what we are charging for a product. So that's kind of the niche that we've taken. We are in this kind of business. And that's possible because we actually have a physical hardware, but also a firmware which makes it run well. And anyone who has worked with FPGAs before will tell you how horrific it is to make an FPGA work the way you want. And that was, in fact, for our new product, that was the majority of the engineering effort went there. And those we can keep secret because it's firmware. Nobody cares about that. None of our customers will have to mess with it. It just brings out some basic functionality. And then you build a pyramid of user software on top of it. And I'll give you another little tidbit, which is you have the hardware, you have the firmware, and on top of that, you have the user interface. We've even gone as far as to say the user interface, open source, completely free. Add anything you like. So you have to figure out, I found, in your business what you want to sell, and then make sure that in a very game theoretic kind of way, the niche that you occupy, the decisions that you've made are such that no other player will find it in their interests to go around your product.
So would you be interested in getting acquired, for example, by Toshiba and work for them at some point? And the same question to the rest of the panel, if that would be an option to you, or if you would like to keep running your own company, what's your future plans?
Open agenda for me. We'll just see how it goes. Let's see where the new product takes us. And then if some big company wants to make us an offer, we'll see it on a case-by-case basis.
So that's not something you had been thinking from the start, where it will end. I would like to hear other options.
If I may, so we've got venture capitalist backing. We took investment, and as soon as you start talking to a venture capitalist, they start asking about the route to exit, and so it forces you to think about this early on. I think for Excelicom, the most likely exit is acquisition by a bigger company of Excelicom. There is always the option of IPO. But yeah, we'll see which direction we go. For me, I feel like I'm able to make a really significant impact in the world of 5G from the role that I have at the company, and that is a key motivator for me. So I'm really eager to see it through and see where that takes me.
Thank you, Rob. What about you, Iris?
Yeah, so for me, there are different, probably the people that might want to acquire me are construction consultancy firms. And so, yeah, I haven't fully thought out like how I want to sell, but I'm not like, this doesn't have to be something forever for me. So I'm happy to sell in the future. Okay,
we have a question from Jack Williamson. Jack, would you like to ask your question?
Hiya, so it's something I thought of while Rob was talking. So Rob said he had to make some changes to his business plan. What sort of changes did you make, and were there any sort of mistakes that you made early on, or things, sort of expectations that you had that didn't quite work out and made you need to make those changes?
Yes, so we made quite a big bet, which didn't come true. We bet that a particular piece of technology would be adopted into 5G, carried over from 4G. So all the research we were doing was on a very specific type of error correction which had been used in 4G and also in 3G. And so we'd worked on ways to improve it and refine it and make it run faster and better. And our hope and expectation was that that technology would be carried through from 3G into 4G and into 5G. But what actually happened within a year of us getting investment is that 5G went in a different direction and adopted all new technologies. In retrospect, actually, that created a bigger opportunity for us because it meant that everyone was reset and back to starting point, and it means we could develop something and not be behind everyone else. But that was quite a big pivot that we had to make.
I was reminded there's a couple of kind of cliches that are thrown around quite often. One is an old military saying, which is that no battle plan outlasts contact with the enemy. And so you have a plan, and that's absolutely fine. But as soon as the first shots are fired, then probably things are going to change because there's things you didn't anticipate. Or the old boxer Mike Tyson was famous for saying, "I always start a fight with a plan until I get punched in the face." And that's a little bit like experience, that you have a plan, you work it through, you've got lots of clarity, and then things will change and you have to adapt to it. And one of the great excitements and challenges and stresses I had here when I started doing startups, that things change and you have to change it and respond to it. But that is part of the cycle. That's part of the journey, and you have to learn to enjoy and embrace that journey and that experience, because it's where great things happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So another question by Yang.
Thank you for delivering a great talk and good insight to commercializing research. I think for me in particular, I would like to learn, when would you know along your PhD that your research is mature enough to take it forward? I think because I think we already suffer with kind of self-doubt syndrome during our researching, whether this is good enough, and having to think about whether this is going to make money is kind of like a next level stress, and it's kind of hard to gauge from kind of as a PhD perspective. And then the second question, which is linked to that, is as you are working through your PhD, you're publishing your work. How do you navigate and manage in terms of what I want to publish and what I can save for my business? Because when you publish something, that information is then available to the public. So yeah, some guidance on that would be much appreciated.
So who would like to take that on? Yeah, please.
I think those two are really brilliant questions, and definitely things that you should be thinking about. So on the good enough question, I think what I thought was fascinating when I finished is that what actually I started talking to customers. That's a way to find out whether your product is good enough. So you find out where the problem is that you think that you can solve, and you just talk to customers and find out whether they would be interested. Well, you don't talk about your product, but they talk about their problem. So you see if that is something that your product can solve. And I actually found that they didn't want my super fancy product. They wanted a much simpler. They'd never used satellite images before, and they wanted me to purchase some satellite images for them. That was for me an easy way to make some money doing consultancy for them. And that's actually with quite a lot of academics, that the industry is actually quite behind on some of the academic innovations that we do. Like we're constantly evolving on the next academic trail, but actually sometimes industry is still behind on some of these earlier ones because not enough of us are actually commercializing what we've created. So in some cases, it can be just talking to customers and finding out what they want, and then seeing if this is something that you can create. And then on the PhD in publishing, I published very little things, kind of. It is a good idea, I guess, to hold things back as much as you're like still allowed to get your PhD by the end of it. But this depends on like if you want to stay also a little bit in academia, but it is a smart move to not publish everything. You can also speak with the patent people that Rob can maybe talk more about, so they could help you as well with how to navigate that IP issue. If you have a brilliant idea just towards the end of your PhD, which I know some of the other founders have had, they've held that back because, yeah, I mean, if you need to negotiate a spin-out argument, and then they say, no, now we want that percent also, and they want to license that new product that you're starting to make as well. Like, of course, the university wants to make some money out of your great ideas as well. So it is difficult to navigate, but always have your eyes wide open for everyone, and talk to some of the previous spin-out companies from the university, and they will also be able to help you like how to navigate those kind of conversations a bit.
Yes, thank you, Iris. We have another question from Charles.
Or maybe there's because I did say quickly about like this patent thing that I think maybe Rob could lean into before moving on.
Yeah, if I quickly add something on that then. So I think, so in pursuit of a PhD, it is important to publish. Publishing and patents are not mutually exclusive. So when you file a patent, it gets published after a year or so. So in any case, anything you publish will become public knowledge. So anything you patent will become public knowledge. You can always file a patent and be writing the paper, and then as soon as the patent's filed, you can submit the paper. There is even a route where you can write a paper, draft it, and then give it to the patent office. You just pay a few £100 to do that, and then that that registers the idea, you can go ahead then and submit the publication for public, the paper for publication, and then continue working on the patent. The challenge with that is you can't add any new ideas or change any words or anything like that after you've registered at the patent office. So it can be a challenge to turn a paper into a patent when you go that route, but it does exist, and I've used that in the past. So it's a challenge to navigate. I think I would always encourage people to talk with their supervisors, talk with the patent panel of the faculty. Ben and I can advise as well on this. Yeah, I think you just have to talk to people and get their views.
Now, ARC doesn't have any patents, but I'm involved in another venture which does, and the recipe that we usually use is that we write the paper, and then before we submit it, or we go for a patent. We go for a patent translation, so we do the patent translation, because what we found is that writing for the paper and writing for the patent are rather different things. You have a different audience and you have to cover different things. The paper is more concerned about proving a particular set of points and doing thorough scientific research, whereas the patent has to cover a main idea and the main branches of that idea, that even if you have no data, but you have a hunch, if I change, in my case, that transistor from there to there, it could work better for such and such application. So you try to tile kind of the space that you have, the design space, and figure everything that has a potential, all the variants that have a potential, bundle them together in a patent, and then you have a bunch of clauses that cover both what you've published and all of the speculative improvements you could be making into the future. That's my 2 bobs worth of contribution on this one.
Can I ask a quick question as well to you, Alex? Did you hold back some of your patents because maybe like when you put your patent out there, it becomes public, like people can start copying you? And I hear a lot from other founders that they find that they file a patent and then some Chinese company comes along and like makes your product as well, and you can fight them, of course, but in that meantime, like they might have already reproduced your product. Is that a reason for you not to patent what you've been doing, or it might put them some ideas in their head that might have not been there when you start patenting?
Well, that is always a risk, but I would say that usually because of the time it takes to do the turnaround from filing to that becoming public knowledge, by then the plan, at least for my venture, was to have already raised the money and be on the way to production. So ideally, if you want to avoid that, you should be at least at MVP, a minimum viable product, by that point. But sometimes, it just doesn't work. C'est la vie. I wouldn't hold back, though, unless there was a particular reason.
Yep. Rob, I think we are going to have a specific training on patents at some point in one of the events organized by the CDT. So the students will have the chance to learn more about that. I would like to come back to Charles because I didn't give him the chance to ask the question, and then I'll go back to Jack.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, thanks for the really interesting talks, by the way. They were really good. I know you guys have mentioned this a lot already, actually, but I was wondering if you guys could comment about what your immediate support circle looked like when just the inception, because I'm guessing that when you had the idea, you didn't immediately go after a patent lawyer. You maybe, like you're saying, talk to supervisors and maybe other people as well. I was wondering if you guys could comment on that and your experiences.
Yeah, so I did speak to my supervisor, but he's not very business minded. So if you have one that is, then that's very helpful. But otherwise, they might also think that it distracts you from doing research. So they might discourage it a little bit. And so for me, it was really stepping into future worlds. There's also like societies at the university that gives you just to hang out with other people that like entrepreneurship. So there's like the Fish on Toast and some others that organize events where maybe there are more undergraduates there, but as a PhD student, it's also quite fun to join them and learn from the people that they also let speak. And yeah, hang out with them and find out whether that's something that you also feel excited by. I think I had a very much like a feeling of like, these are my people, in a way that was maybe a bit weird, but also like just this kind of really drive that people have that otherwise didn't find so much in academia. People hated their PhDs or something like that, and I actually quite enjoyed mine, and I really was excited by the potential of scaling up, and others were a little bit more like, no, I just want to get a job 9 to 5. Why would I do any more than I have to? And so that, I think, the being amongst some other people like that was encouraging to me.
Yeah, I think if I can speak to my experience, for me, as I recall, it was that I just filed I requested the university to file a patent, and then that opened the door to the Research and Innovation Service, that opened the door to Future Worlds, that opened the doors to Set Squared. I think I would say in the Mind CDT, there were several of us who have these sorts of experiences, and we were all very happy to provide mentoring and support as well. I think that actually I've seen quite a lot of change over the last 5 years around the support network that we have. When we started Accelercom, there really was only one option for getting funding, which was VC funding, and there was really only one VC as well that invested in university spin-outs. And if anything, that's actually got worse. They've all consolidated into one. But now there's an environment at the university of angel investors, and there's relationships with all sorts of different organizations that can support as well. So I think things have never been better for support mechanisms.
If I could just chime in really quickly, what I observe is often people are overly cautious. I think the instincts are to be secretive, to hold back, to think, okay, particularly because of the IP disclosure question, you think, people might copy the idea. And so the instinct can be to shut yourself in a room and just stay on your own. And I think I would argue very strongly that the far bigger risk is that you run out of momentum and you feel isolated, and so then it dries up. That's a far bigger risk than by talking with people and building a network around you and reaching out to people that someone will steal the idea. I think it's a far bigger risk that you end up on your own and isolated. And so I'd very much encourage you, as Rob said, talk to your supervisor, talk to people in across Minds, come and talk to Future Worlds, reach out to a peer group that can help support you, because it makes such a difference.
Thank you. And, we have 2 more questions, and because we're running out of time, let's see what Jack would like to ask. Jack?
So just sort of, I guess it's quite a quick one, really. In terms of if you want to use these services like Future World and the university's like patent service, what is the cost to you as an individual? Does the university gain an interest in your company, or is it free, or do you have to make some sort of financial commitment?
Yeah, so we just take your whole soul, body, limbs, everything. It all belongs to us and not to you. So Future Worlds is completely free. It's all based on goodwill. From our perspective, it's all about helping you to achieve as much as you possibly can, to have as good an experience as possible, and a belief that if you go away with great goodwill, feeling that that was brilliant and it helped you achieve some great things, then hopefully over time you might give back, whether it be to the next generation of people that follow you, whether it be like in Stanford, where successful billionaires from Stanford donate more than $1 billion back to Stanford every year. Well, fantastic. When you're a billionaire, if you want to give back, then fantastic. So from a Future World side, there is no cost. On an IP side, certainly, if there is university IP in what you are working on, if you're collaborating with a staff member, and it's something that's supported by the university, then there is a discussion and a dialogue that takes that has to go forward through the IP panel to work out what that university interest might be. So yes, there's nuance around that, but from a Future World side and a support across the university, that is completely without strings.
And there's a subtle point there as well, which is the difference between expertise, which an individual develops during their PhD. So that expertise belongs to the individual, but inventive ideas is IP that it depends on the IP arrangements around a particular PhD, but the default is that the university has a stake in those.
Yep. Last question from Yang.
I think it's quite interesting because I think this in this talk I've learned that this is the first time I've learned the patents and IPs can actually have negative impact in your business model and the path forward. Because for anyone who watched Dragon's Den's weekly, we kind of learned that how important patents is to some dragons, and I'm just wondering then how significant it is around this patent thing if we were to roll out our research into something that we can commercialize.
Shall I take this one? So Excelicom has now, I think it's about 13 granted patents around the world. We've got about 30 to 40 that are in the process. People ask us, why do we write so many patents, or why do we write patents? And honestly, I don't have a really clear, straightforward answer to that question. The reasons why we have done it include being able to say to our customers that this technology that you're getting is unique, you can't get it from anywhere else, and here's a patent to prove it, or to at least to suggest it. It demonstrates value to investors, and it allows us to demonstrate growing value as we grow our portfolio of patents. There is a vague feeling that one day we might be in a litigation battle with another company, and that we need patents to defend ourselves or to attack them. Although that one is actually, that feels quite far down the list, because it's actually very expensive to get involved in that kind of thing, and with at the scale that we are, we're not really exposed to that risk. So for us, it's mainly about growing the value and creating opportunity with customers.
I think I would chime in and say there is this kind of it depends answer to it. So it depends on your product, the particular IP that you've been generating, the particular market that you're focusing on, the kind of route that you're looking to develop. So it is not as simple as, oh, this is the answer and it applies to every individual and every company. It depends on your particular situation. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's really important to talk to people around the support structures to help you to navigate to finding what is the right route for you, whether it is through patenting, whether it's through just retaining it as a trade secret, or what the right route is for you to follow.
Great. I think we gave a lot of insights to students today, and there are more events organized by our CDT to follow, like the Innovation Camp, where Set Squared will be involved, and I guess more questions will be answered during this event. But for today, I would like to thank you very much for your participation and sharing your expertise and experience from all these journeys you have been involved in. Just a last thing, is there any advice you would like to impart with your audience today?
Oh, Rob.
That's a no from Rob.
That's a no.
Sorry, I hit the wrong button. I was just going to say, be brave.
Yeah.
And I was going to say, you have to take the first steps. Like I sometimes joke that the one common variable that underlies every successful startup is that at some point they did start and they did take that first step.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're unsure about anything, just step into Future Worlds. There are people, like more people than you can think, that can help you. And there are like loads of people that have industry experience that are probably related to what you're doing, and they can help you. And so the support network is so strong that there is no excuse like to not step in, kind of. Like if this is something you've always wanted, and there's no excuse anymore. There's money on the table, kind of like there's enough, lots more money in startups now than there was before. And so I've received so many grants, but also because these grants have become available, and you can just do it.
Yeah, at least you have to try, right?
Yeah.
And for me, it's just use common sense. So it's like a big equation. If you look at all the variables and you do the calculations and you find out that you have a valuable proposition that you can actually compete in the market, make the decision, pursue it or not. And once you say yes, just go for it.
Excellent. Thank you all so much. Thank you. And thanks to the audience for participating, and have a nice afternoon, everyone.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.